Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video interview program that features me talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist slash secular slash awesome community. This is episode number 69, dude. We're recording live on September 29th, 2016. I would like to thank Brother Brewer for being my previous guest a mere 4 weeks ago. I'm looking forward to returning to regular broadcasting. So if you want to listen to me talk about mainly beer, oddly enough, you can listen to this week's Skeptics Brew Pub. So quick note, I was in Savannah recently, so I got to hang out with the NRR crew with Bobby and Ashley. And it was determined during that trip that I am officially the ass of the atheist community. So tonight I am talking to the lawyer of the atheist community. Andrew Torrez is a real-life law-talking guy with his own practice in Baltimore, Maryland. He is also the co-host of the Opening Arguments podcast with Thomas Smith. I suggest you listen to it. Good evening, Andrew, and welcome to the show.
Zach, thank you very much for having me on.
And I will, as we like to do at the beginning, I started with a Sam Adams Oktoberfest. Note the American spelling of Oktoberfest. And then, just in case, Sierra Nevada Oktoberfest. And by the way, the Sierra Nevada Oktoberfest is actually made by a brewery in Germany. That's been around since 1670. So it's authentic, so they can use the K. Anyway, I know you're drinking some quality stuff.
Well, you have to get to that because I love Sierra Nevada. I tend to be in the hophead IPO. I'm drinking their torpedo. Not at present, but I have some in my fridge. And I'd love to know how the Oktoberfest is. So you got to tell me how that is.
Well, if we ever meet halfway, we could go to Asheville and go to the new Sierra Nevada brewery, which I hear is amazing.
I'm down for that. That's
an odd location. Now, normally the first question I ask is about your personal religious background, but we're going to rephrase. How did you get into the lawyering biz? Did I say lawyering poorly? Great.
No. I tend to. Thomas and I have this inside joke because when we're storyboarding, we have a long document that we trade back and forth on Google Docs, and I almost always typo lawyer by putting the Y first. So he pronounces it layering to me whenever we chat because of my propensity for the typo. So, but to answer the question, I kind of fell into it by accident. This is going to be a really, really geeky story, so I apologize. But I was one of those, yeah. So I started school early. I was 15 my senior year, graduated, went to college, went straight through, valedictorian at GW, that kind of thing. And, I sort of vaguely knew that I liked law, politics, government, philosophy, and law school and figure it out. It was that's what smart people do. So it's what I did. And then I came out and started working. You get at Ivy League law schools, you get sort of funneled into what we call big law firms, because it really just sort of happens around you, whether you know what's going on or not. And they're all, sort of out there trying to compete for you, and they bring you out for interviews, and, you do this summer associate job that is a total junket, and it's ridiculous. And that's what happened to me. I went to Covington and Burling, which is, one of the largest law firms in the country. A great place filled with really brilliant lawyers, but I was 3 or 4 years in, and I realized I hadn't really figured out what I wanted to do yet. I was just sort of going to the best law school, going to the best law firm, still in that I want to get an A kind of mindset. And then I left Covington after about 5 years. I went to a slightly smaller firm to, sort of on the express promise of, I will get to try cases. I will get to run cases. I will get to do the frontline first chair work. And I did that. And I was there for another 14 years, 13, 14 years, and then went off on my own January 1 of 2015. So here I am.
Well, what was the process like getting into Harvard Law, I assume it's a slightly difficult thing to pull off.
Yeah, it is the at least at the time, I think it's still the case. Sort of the single biggest determinant was your score on the LSATs. I've always been really good at standardized tests, but and the LSATs are weird because they really are like they're scored 120 to 180, and so and there are tremendous variations at the top. So a perfect score was a 180. Um, I missed two questions, and that bumped me all the way down to a 175. And then, it sort of spreads out like a pyramid below that. So, so I knew, I mean, I had a 4.0 GPA. Uh, I had this fantastic LSAT score. So, I knew that I was aiming for, one of those top couple of law schools. Although boy, this is going to sound even more geeky, but but whatever you're asking. We used to play a game asking around in our class to see if anybody got into Harvard, Yale, and Stanford all in the same admissions class, and none of us did. We couldn't find anybody who had. So I get into Harvard and Yale, but not Stanford, and other permutations throughout. So I don't know if they still share applications admissions data or not, or if it really is kind of a coin flip once you get at that level. But I never found anybody that made it into all three. So
That's still, I mean, I feel like that's impressive enough,
it, it it's interesting to me. I mean, I coached high school debate for about 15 years. And my son is 13 right now. So, in talking to kids that are looking at applying to college or in college and applying to law school, grad school, that sort of thing, it's amazing and ridiculous and unfair, sort of how tiny little differences are parsed out. I mean if I'd have missed two more questions on that day, which is a exam, uh, I wouldn't have been looking at Harvard. And I mean, what's two questions out of, a huge 5-hour day worth of exams, but it totally determined my life right there. And, that's when you think about that, that's crazy, right? Like it shouldn't be that way.
but I guess it is. I have, this will come out sounding bad. I have a lawyer friend. I have one lawyer friend, and I
Uh-huh.
always pass back and forth quotes from a certain Simpsons character. Is it okay that when I first said I'm reaching out to a lawyer that I pictured you as Lionel Hutz?
No, I would be disappointed if you hadn't done otherwise.
So
Wait, what
what's
is your favorite Lionel Hutz score?
I don't know. That's why you're the judge. That's why I'm the law talking guy. I think that was one of them.
I like that's a good one.
But you have a few on your
We have
show openings, so I think those pop in the brain, or at least one. You know.
yeah. Well, we do the the look at him. He's wearing a belt. Like that's a great one. And then we later do the case closed, which is another good one. I'm also a big fan of the Futurama hyper chicken lawyer. And so when we have new quotes to cycle in at the beginning, and I am pushing for. There's a great sequence where Stand and is being intimidated, and he looks up at the judge and says, "I would like to." Exercise my right to remain silent on the grounds that my organs will be ground up and used as a patty. And the judge says, the 67th Amendment. So, so that one might get cycled into the opening in the next couple episodes.
Yeah, the I've been in front of this judge many times. Sometimes as a lawyer.
Yeah, often as a lawyer.
Yeah. So
What does your law friend do? Your friend who's a lawyer.
he does
Some
workers'
practice.
comp stuff. He's
Hmm.
been doing that for a while. What's your practice?
Well, I spent sort of those first 19 years as a litigator. So a general commercial litigator, often The bulk of my work was insurance coverage, which, believe me, I will not go into because it will put everybody listening to this to sleep. But huge, billion-dollar coverage cases. Since going off on my own, there are fewer Fortune 100 companies that are engaging me. And so I've become more of a generalized business lawyer. So I work with small businesses, startups, sort of at whatever stage you are in the process in terms of, formation and advice and best practices. And, I still litigate cases, but I find that most of that litigation comes where you have a pre-existing relationship. So it's really just focus, it's shifted a lot towards the, advice and relationship part of that, business work now, which it suits me. It's been fun. Some of my clients are pretty interesting, as you well know.
Well, was it particularly nerve-wracking to say, you know what, I'm just going to start my own practice and do this myself?
Yeah, yes. I mean, in a couple of ways, right? I mean, so the first is there's a tremendous amount of variance in terms of, your income and what you're bringing in. And so, I had this beautiful, huge house in Montgomery County that I still miss, that I loved very much. And we had to sell the house, and we had to move to a place where the cost of living was a little lower, and set a budget and do things that, you know, uh, when you're in the middle of working at a big firm, those are not always the issues that you're facing. So there was a real kind of economic reality to it. But um, for me, for what I was doing in my life, it was really important to continue to do the things that I enjoyed doing the most, which were becoming harder and harder to do in a big firm environment, right? So the people I would reach out to and meet, and they would say, "Hey, Andrew, can you help me with this?" And I had to say, "Yeah, I can," but I had to quote them the exorbitant rate that my last firm was charging, and it was hard to do that. It was hard to help. It was really, really hard to help, small businesses and startups and that kind of thing. And that's really where I had more of a passion. And, a side benefit has been that I've been able to, uh, do things like opening arguments and go out and be me and kind of, you know, put my actual personality out there as opposed to, you know, um, what you have to do in order to uh, be approved by your corporate firm, if that makes sense.
So this is a natural transition then, because obviously, starting your own practice meant, you're looking for the big bucks of podcasting. So it makes sense that you're headed in that direction. Now, when two guys are co-hosting a podcast, we got to do the romantic comedy meet cute. So how did you and Thomas kind of get to meet, and then how did he kind of talk you into being like a guest on Atheistically Speaking?
Well, actually, I had sent Thomas a message because, I've been a consumer in the atheist community for a long time, but kind of, I mean, I don't want to say closeted about it, but not an active participant, right? A passive consumer, listening to podcasts, sharing them with my wife, and raising a free thinking child, that sort of thing, but not out there, not active, not having my name in the community. And there were business reasons for that, right? Like, people Google you, and my firm sort of let it be known, hey, look, like, we can't have people looking up who's first chair on this case and have them come up with all sorts of crazy stuff. And so, so that's where I was. When I went out on my own, I said, well, one of the benefits of being out on my own is I'm going to put out who I am out there. And I don't think for my longstanding clients it's going to make a difference. If it does, it does. But hey, this is this is a perk of being out on your own. So I sent Thomas a message, and basically it was he had someone on his show, and they did kind of that classic. Made an appeal to the First Amendment in a situation that was purely private speech, right? And I said, hey, this was a great show. You should know there was this sort of agreed upon appeal to the First Amendment, and the First Amendment wouldn't have applied in this situation. And he said, okay, cool, thanks. And then a couple of weeks later was when Scalia died. And Thomas sent me a message and said, hey, would you like to come on and, do a show and talk about Scalia? And I said, oh boy, would I, because I hate that dude. And I think I have an interesting take on that that's a little different than just, I hate that dude, which I stand by, which, has been, you've listened to the show, so, you know this, but my position is that Antonin Scalia is the most activist Supreme Court justice in modern history. That thing about his jurisprudence is designed to provide a veneer for reaching a conservative political outcome. You can tell how he's going to vote in every case simply by looking at the issues involved. And so, and in the episodes that I did, I kind of walked through how, he has this elaborate, intricate sounding method of jurisprudence, but it's really designed to enable him to say, I don't care if everybody has understood that the Second Amendment has meant this for the past 200 years. I say it means this other thing. And his methodology allows him to get there. So, so those were the first two shows that I did on Atheistically Speaking. I really enjoyed them, and I think Thomas got some good feedback. And then, I sort of did AS more frequently, and then after about 4 or 5 episodes, we started talking about, putting together the podcast, which, was originally going to be Legally Speaking to fit in, but turns out there are other people. There's like this crappy law firm in Canada that's put out like 4 episodes of a podcast. There's nothing that would prevent us, right? There's no copyright issues because, we wouldn't be banking on their, like 200 listens that they got over 4 episodes in Canada last year. But we just wanted to make sure that we had, something no one had done before, so that all, when people go to find us, they didn't find these, third-rate hacks and listen to them instead and go, I don't know what was so great about that podcast. So we went with Opening Arguments. Really happy with the name and how the podcast has been doing, and obviously with Thomas. So
it's not just true that Thomas was the first person to reach out to you that knew how to edit audio. That's not it.
I will say 2 things though. Like, so the first, however much Eli wants to crack the joke, like Thomas is not just a like great at asking questions. I mean, he may be the best interviewer I've ever met or sat down with. And I wrote a book on baseball in the late 1990s, and to promo that, I did 50 or 60 radio shows around the country. A lot of your morning zoo types and, WFAN. And so I've sat down for a lot of interviews, and Thomas is better than any of those guys. I really think if there were, media talent scouts out there, like if I were one of them, he's somebody I would put on MSNBC tomorrow. Like, he's that good. He's really, really good. And he's also good with the technical stuff too. So, I'm kind of brushing that off, but he does the stuff that I couldn't remotely begin to about handle. Well, as you well know, it took 15 minutes and several tries to get me on this Google Hangouts call. So I think I need all the technical support I can get.
Yeah, that's true. It does take a little more than audio skills to pull it off. And yeah, Thomas is. It's like I haven't regularly listened to him, but he guests on so many shows that I hear him all the time. And then when this show kind of came out, especially when he artfully teased it on Atheistically Speaking, we made the little transitional episode with the Gore Bush. That was a good one there to make the transition. So. Okay, we gotta ask about this. I can't just go by the script. I gotta go off script occasionally.
Okay.
So what's up with this book?
Fair enough.
Because it sounds like if you're a baseball guy, maybe you're an Orioles guy. Could be, possibly.
Um, yeah, no, I grew up an Orioles fan. So the book is called Off Base. If you go into Amazon, the best way to find, you can type in Off Base. I think it gets you there from books. Certainly Torrez with a Z, Torrez, in books will pull it up. It's out of print. It was kind of I wrote it in my last year of law school, and then finished when I got out. And it was kind of a pre-Moneyball. The pitch was how to explain the growing stat head movement to your grandmother. And indeed, my grandmother, who was alive at the time, had read it, and that was part of the pitch. But the idea was, it's even more true now, but we were starting to get inundated with an ocean of stats in baseball, and it was how to separate out, the useful statistics from the useless ones or the misleading ones. So I would do, like, in interviews, I would get on, and and the host would be like, "So what do you mean by batting average is meaningless?" And I would say, "Well, in 1963, in 1863, do you know how many balls it took to issue a walk?" Right? And the host would say, "Well, 4." And no, the answer was, in 1863, it took 9 balls to issue a walk. So, when they were inventing baseball statistics,
so
right,
no
like
one
batting
walked.
average. Yeah, well, right, it was a
Was
fluke,
this
right? In
3
order to
strikes too at the time?
yeah, they did play around with the number of strikes over time, but it's mostly always been 3. But walks have fluctuated from anywhere from 3 to 9 balls, and so when it was 9, right, to walk was just a fluke, right? And batting average as a statistic is not defined as what happens over the amount of times you come to the plate. It is defined as the number of hits, and then excluding out a whole bunch of, like, fluke crazy things, right? Like sacrifice flies and bunts and hit by pitches, over the number of times you come to the plate, again, with all that stuff subtracted out from the denominator. Right. And that makes sense when you're in a regime where you only walk as a fluke. But when they shorten it down to 4, like, we know taking walks is a skill. We know plate discipline is a skill. And it's a really, really important skill. And batting average doesn't measure that. So, right. So that was kind of like my first chapter in the book, and the first way of going on and talking about it. And I thought that was a pretty good hook until Moneyball came out like 6 months later, and I was like, oh, that's a much better way to say the stuff that I'm trying to say. And the way I explain that is, I could actually turn the video around. I can show you the sofa set that I bought with my book royalties. It's a very nice sofa set, but it's a sofa set. And then I went back to being a lawyer, as opposed to Michael Lewis, who optioned several multi-million-dollar motion pictures. I don't bear him any ill will, though, because he's really just a much better writer than I am. So, like, I read Moneyball, and I'm like, oh yeah, why didn't I do any of this? Like, this is so much better than what I was doing. But but so be it. But that's how I got started with baseball. Yeah, go ahead.
Opening arguments, the movie. You never know. Could happen. Was that crazy billionaire money?
Yeah.
Could happen.
That I'm looking. If you have a lot of Hollywood producers that watch this show, right?
All over the place.
Yeah. So they should. It's PA Torrez, patorrez.com. Send me a message. I've got script ideas for OA the movie. I've got casting ideas too. That'll be great.
Yeah. So why can't you take legal advice from a podcast?
In addition to making a great catchphrase, 2 sort of serious reasons for it. The first is that one of the things that is often the case as a lawyer is there are details that are really, really important to how you evaluate a case that are really difficult to explain to a non-lawyer, and maybe even counterintuitive. And so if you're just sitting out there listening, and I've spoken sort of generally about, like, the law generally is this, right? So one of the things, and here, let me give my disclaimer again. Don't take legal advice from a podcast or a video cast. This is for general educational purposes only and does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. So if I say, speaking, the law is very, very favorable in terms of libeling public figures, and you can say just about anything so long as you're not doing it with actual malice, right? You might look at that and go, okay, my case seems really, really similar to the one Andrew's talking about, so I'm just going to go ahead. And, there might be important details that differentiate your case that you're just not thinking about. So it's a bad practice for you, hypothetical listener, because the case may seem similar in ways that aren't legally significant and may be different in ways that you're not thinking about. And that's why you want to talk to the lawyer about it. And then the second thing is the ethic rules require us to say that. And that's also, there's another important aspect of that, which is when you have an attorney-client relationship, rights attached to that, right? Like the most important is the right of confidentiality. Like if you hire me as your lawyer, I've used this example before, but you can tell me, hey, I was the second guy on the grassy knoll who killed Kennedy, and I am bound, like I can't tell my wife that. And if I breathe a word of that to anybody, you can have me disbarred. So in order to protect and make sure people know, hey, look, no rights are attaching in this situation. And also, your situation may differ in ways, even if you think it's 99% similar, that 1% difference may be all the difference in the world. That's why we say the disclaimer.
But I do think, as the show goes forward, maybe T-shirts say I took legal advice from a podcaster. That could be, a bad idea legally, but it'd be an interesting shirt, right?
Yeah, I would definitely wear a "Don't take legal advice from a podcast" shirt.
So how does the podcasting hourly rate stack up to the lawyering one? And does Thomas get an itemized bill for each email you send him?
The podcasting hourly rate, I figured this out. It is it started off 3 orders of magnitude lower than my hourly rate, and has just moved up to not quite 2 orders of magnitude lower. So I typically bill out at $395 an hour, and my rate that I've been putting things in has been equated to about $2 an hour. So it's a bit of a drop in income, but it's been fun.
Which you're definitely putting in the time. So let's cover some of the greatest hits for people who haven't listened. And why haven't you listened? Hit the pause button, listen to the entire opening arguments, and then come back. Okay, now you're back. Let's see how this goes. So what made you decide to open the wound of the George W. versus Al Gore presidency? And what were like a few things that might have happened differently that could have changed things?
Yeah, well, so a couple of different things. And to answer that second part first, almost anything that happened differently would have affected that election, because, one of the things we talk about is almost everybody knows historically that, that wound up being 273 to 268, 267, sorry. So, that Bush won by 3 electoral votes. But what a lot of people do, and that came from Florida. But what a lot of people don't realize is that to get to those 3 electoral votes, George W. Bush had to win West Virginia, 5 electoral votes from West Virginia, which is a state that had not voted Republican since Ronald Reagan in 1984, when every state went Republican, right, except Minnesota. West Virginia was a loyal Dukakis state. He only won 10 states, but one of them was West Virginia. It was a deep blue Democratic stronghold until all of a sudden it wasn't. They won Tennessee, which Clinton Gore had won twice and was Al Gore's home state. They won in New Hampshire, which Clinton Gore won twice and which we think of as a reliable Democratic state. Again, there's some historical Republican roots there, but you look at all of these areas where there was really a tremendous. I mean, the it was a very, very narrow path to victory, right? Like the Bush team had to win all of those states, and they did. And even with, the amount of data that we had, considerably more in 2000 than in previous elections, although less than now, uh, it was really, really surprising. So why did we do it? To be honest, we did it because I kept getting over and over again, like Bernie or Busters in my Facebook and Twitter timelines, who were saying things like, well, uh, I live in a state where it doesn't matter, so I'm going to vote for Jill Stein, or whatever. And um, and I thought it was worth revisiting, the last close election. I think a lot of the rhetoric that I saw coming out of the Stein campaign at that time was the same kind of rhetoric I saw coming out of Ralph Nader in 2000, which was ridiculous, right? Like the Ralph Nader, I remember them arguing, like, well, but both George W. Bush and Al Gore are these corporate, institutional candidates, and there's not really any difference. And so even if my vote throws the election to George W. Bush, what difference does it make? And if you are a left of center guy like me, I think you look at those 8 years and think, it's not possible that that Gore would not have done things vastly differently. If you're a Supreme Court geek like me, you look at that and say, have had three more arch conservative, mid 40s arch conservatives added to the Supreme Court. So, in my view, it did a hell of a lot of damage. And so that's why I wanted to tackle that. And then we got into it, and there was just all this fun, great stuff. But I mean, I thought it was fun, great stuff.
Well, was there a potential in that election for another like recount in a different state that might have had a better result, or was Florida the closest vote wise of the contested states?
Yeah, well, Florida was 537 votes out of almost 5 million votes that were cast. So that's what, 0.0001%. So nothing was that was that close. And the issue, I think, was that, there really was a question of, is that are the numbers that are being reported here, given that it's essentially tied, right? Is that really reflecting what people wanted to do in that state? And so one of the things we talked about in the podcast that I think is really, really interesting, that I don't know how to solve as a lawyer, right, is the case of the butterfly ballot, right, where it was a two-page ballot that opened up in the middle, and the holes ran down the center, the spine of the book. And the way the names were listed, it's really, really easy. I mean, you don't have to be an idiot to do this. It's really, really easy to punch the second button, the second hole, thinking that was going to be the Gore Lieberman hole, and their hole was actually the third hole, because you had to look at the flip side of the page. And like the statistical evidence, we linked to a paper. That second hole actually recorded a vote for Patrick Buchanan, and they ran a statistical analysis, and in the county, Palm Beach County, which has 1 million registered voters in it, in that county where they used this ballot, the Patrick Buchanan vote was like 10,000 times higher than it was elsewhere in the state. And then, there was also the intuitive approach, like Patrick Buchanan is a, well-known anti-Semite. This was an overwhelmingly Jewish county. Like the idea that he would be really, really popular with elderly Jews in Florida was a really tough, tough thing for people to swallow. But at the end of the day, right, what can you do about that? Like, you can't reconstruct those numbers. So you're sort of left with, this conundrum for democracy, right? Like if we had a machine where, when I push the button, it says, do you vote Gore or do you vote Bush? And I push the Gore button, but it records it as a vote for Bush. Like, we don't have a problem saying, okay, that's a problem. Throw that out. Let's find that out. Let's do it over again. But we couldn't do that in Palm Beach County. And as a result, so the philosophical question of, who do the voters prefer right? I think the evidence, when you put all of the sources together, is they preferred Al Gore. The law went, their votes were recorded for George Bush, and that should trouble anybody who thinks democracy is important.
Yeah, it's troubling. Although I like the way it was covered, and you set the stage well for the show because you do have Thomas coming off as the everyman who's asking the questions that I think the listener would ask, and then you got the detailed legal mind, so you're like, okay, here we go, and you've obviously done the research, so it's a great way you kind of play off each other. And yeah, that was a 4-part series, right? The
Yeah.
Gore. That could have probably gone 40
Yeah.
if you really wanted to.
Yeah, we've tried to handle things in discrete chunks. So, for example, our episode 13, where we went through Hillary Clinton's emails, we managed to get that down into like 70 or 80 minutes. So we did that all in one episode. I'm, as you're seeing here, like, I'm verbose, so it just I could keep talking, and Thomas does a good job of saying, okay, it's time to move on to this. But then, that will pose a new question in his mind. And so, we sort of feed off of each other in that way.
Well, after the Hillary episode, which, by the way, came out this week, everybody, episode 13, I'm convinced that you've made a good case. I believe you're one of the lizard people. So
Yeah, well,
how was that to research? And of course, the timing was great with the debate happening on Monday.
yeah, it was really interesting to research because there is an open question there, right? Like, and so what we try and do in all of this, again, I've made no secret online in the podcast here, right? I'm supporting Hillary Clinton for president, but that doesn't mean that I had a predetermined legal answer to the question, right? And so the question that we looked at was, on the facts as reported by the FBI, when Director Comey said no reasonable prosecutor would bring a case on these facts, there were a bunch of voices on the right that said, that's bullshit, that you absolutely would bring a case on these facts. And Rudy Giuliani said, I could win a case before any jury in the country on these facts. And so Hillary Clinton got special treatment. And so that's what we wanted to answer, that narrow question of, if the facts are what the FBI says they are, then did she get special treatment, or would she be, busting rocks in Leavenworth if her name was, Hillary Jones instead of Hillary Clinton? And spoiler for the episode, I think Director Comey was correct. And what I did was, I believe I'm the only person to have done this. I sort of recreated, and as I was doing it, his statement made more sense to me, right? So what I did was, I went and read every case on the Espionage Act since the Espionage Act was promulgated. And I know, right, Director Comey says in his statement, we researched and we could not find a case on these facts. I know that to be true because I did that research and I could not find a case on those facts. That's a hard thing to ask a journalist to do. It's a hard thing to ask a political figure to do. And so I went and I did it. And I think that it's a better answer than the answer that Clinton surrogates and even law professors who were sympathetic to Hillary Clinton gave, which they sort of tried to parse this difference between extremely careless, which is the language that Comey used to describe Clinton's use of her emails, and gross negligence. And, as I say in the podcast, you can make that, that's not a frivolous argument, but it's not a knockdown argument, right? It's a much better argument, in my view, to say that the way prosecutors view this statute, even though the words say gross negligence, no prosecutor is going to build a case against you, and nobody is going to Leavenworth unless they have intentionally taken classified materials that they know to be classified out of the chain of custody, and when they have discovered that, they have not rectified that error. So, all of the cases that I looked at involve people who, like, threw classified documents in their gym bag and then discovered it and were like, oh gosh, I can't tell my superior, I'll get reprimanded. So I'm going to throw it in a dumpster, or I'm going to stick it in a desk drawer, or I'm going to sort of shove it in my garage. And I mean, those are real cases. And when you read those cases, you realize that's not anything like what we're dealing with in the Clinton situation. So.
Well, I'd say the law career has definitely helped you with the research on all this stuff, and it is kind of amazing that Hillary during her public life has had to deal with her husband's scandals and then deal with her own scandals. And she went through 11 hours of testimony about Benghazi, and nothing's really stuck. And I don't know if it's because of the really hard attack on her or the fact that she just nothing. It sticks, like the reputation sticks, but the actual charges don't. That makes people not like her. It's a because
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
have that thought. It's like she's just as bad as Trump. It's like, are you kidding me? But that's my and many
Well,
smart people's opinion.
two things with respect to that, and I've posted this publicly. Eventually, it will get circulated and will no longer be useful. But when I encounter a Trump supporter who says Benghazi, I ask them the very simple question: can you tell me what continent Benghazi is located in? And I've yet to get a correct answer. So I recommend that one. And with respect to the scandals, I think there was an article. I forget the publication. I'm sure you could Google search it. That basically shows that Hillary Clinton's popularity, her favorability ratings drop like 25 points when she's running for something, as opposed to when she's actually in office. So, her numbers while senator, her numbers while Secretary of State were much, much higher than her numbers when she was running for Senate, or her numbers when she was running in 2008 or running right now. And that, and I think that's interesting. And I think that, right, like a very parsimonious explanation of that is you have somebody who is a polarizing candidate, but a competent public servant. And, I realize that's a little self-serving, or I should say that's a little party serving as a self-identified Democrat. But I mean, it seems to explain things pretty well, right? Like once she's in office, people tend to think she does a good job, but it's when she's out there trying to persuade people to vote for her is when, these things tend to stick more. And there's probably a sexist reason for that. There's probably a personality-based reason for that. There's probably a historical-based reason for that. But
So, how did you go from letting Thomas call himself Esquire to making him act as a Supreme Court judge in this week's, is it bonus episode? Because I was like, okay, I've listened to this week's episode, and then I saw a new one. I'm like, man, you people are just posting like crazy. I'm very impressed.
Yeah. So let me say two things. So the first is we made this post on our patron page, patreon.com/law, and essentially, because we release on a Wednesday, it means some months we're going to have, there are only 4 Wednesdays, some months there are 5, because of the way the weeks run. And just to standardize our practice, on months that have 5 Wednesdays, we're going to release every Wednesday. On months like September that only have 4 Wednesdays, that last week we're going to give you 2 episodes. So it was a week 4, week 5 part of that schedule. So we're gonna do 5. We're gonna always do 5 episodes a month, which just helps us plan our schedule, really. And I've been wanting to do the "You Be the Supreme Court" episode because the one of the things that I believe really strongly, right? So I've expressed a lot of political opinions, but there's an adage both in debate and in law that says if you can't make your opponent's case better than they're making it, then you're going to lose, right? And I believe in that very, very firmly. Like when I go litigate or try a case, I sit in my office and I try and plan out, okay, what are they going to say? What's their best argument? What would I say if that were my client? And that way I know, I go in prepared and have the best arguments in hand, so that I'm not taken off guard. The same thing was true when I was coaching debate. Um, and that, I think that mindset comes from, reading Supreme Court cases as a law student and as a lawyer. You realize even the one-sided one, like it's rare to have something that is truly, one-sided, that there's no merit on either side. Um, because those cases, right? Why do they don't get litigated? They get settled out. They get dropped. At some point, you give up, and it's particularly unlikely that the Supreme Court is going to take something that is, so grotesquely one-sided. I don't mean to suggest it never happens, but by and large, by the time you get to the Supreme Court, you can at least articulate what the argument on the other side is about, and so I kind of I deliberately wanted to take a pending case. This is the Trinity Lutheran Church case, and I wanted to take one knowing that we have. I mean, we're not an explicitly atheist show, but obviously, Thomas and I are both active in the atheist community, and that's the bulk of our listeners on OA. And I wanted to take one where I wanted you to come away after episode 1 thinking, yeah, okay, like I get the case that the church petitioner appellant is making, and and I wanted to point out, like, that is the sleazy Arizona law firm, the Alliance Defending Freedom, that you will they represent all kinds of cases that you hate and all kinds of stupid cases, but this isn't a stupid case, right? Like there's real merits on the church side on this. Now, we haven't gotten to week 2 yet, so, we'll get to go back and forth. But I wanted to make that a tough listen for atheist listeners.
Cliffhanger, everybody. So other than, finishing up, what else do you have? Sorry, I skipped the question. Gosh, I can't believe it at this point. So is it harder, because that's one of your, what is it, the bingo game you have during your show? You come up with like 5 new show ideas during one show. So is it harder to decide what not to talk about when you decide, hey, this is the show we're going to do? Because it seems like Thomas will be the ideas guy, and then you end up being the research guy, but I'm sure it's both ways.
Yeah, no, we bounce it back and forth. I mean, what I'm trying to do is give a good variety of topics so that, we're not, it doesn't feel like we're sort of stuck in a, if I had it to do over again, I would want to put a show in between our Satanic Temple episodes and our 3-parter on Roe v. Wade, because that was really like 5 weeks in a row that were all largely about abortion. And it hadn't occurred to me at the time that, it was going to sort of feel like this is an abortion show. And, there's so many great legal topics out there, good ones that we've done, good ones that we have yet to do, that I want people to know that, anything that might be of, public, political, social interest, and not just kind of a very narrow field. So, we have a document. We pass this Google document back and forth, and I think we have 38 unanswered topics, and many of those would be multi-parter. So, we have over a year's worth of episodes for the main sequence planned out.
Yeah, the Roe v. Wade episode's very much worth listening to, but I can't have you talk about every single episode. The people will think they've already seen the show, right? Or they've already heard you. You got to leave them wanting more. So are there any...
That's right.
Like cases or just topics that you're like, that you'd want to throw out and say, okay, this is probably coming in the future, like, or just ones that would be dream cases to talk about, or subjects?
Okay, yeah, boy, that's really good. So, let's see. One of my dream topics to hit, we did one episode on the sovereign citizens tax protesters movement, and I've gotten so many comments of well, how come you didn't talk about this bit of crazy or that bit of crazy? So we might revisit that, because there's just I find that to kind of go back and revisit that theme. We're definitely going to revisit the concept of jurisprudence. I would love to go back to about the development of constitutional rights. We are going to talk about the religious views of the founding fathers, which I'm really looking forward to that one. We're going to talk about the we've got an episode planned on capital punishment and on the Eighth Amendment. So I think we've got a lot of really fun contemporary political issues that we haven't hit yet, that we're planning on hitting.
Well, good. It's good to know what you have coming up. So we'll get off the show, and then what comes from doing a show, and that means you occasionally will guest star on other shows. So what was it like participating in the first episode of the Vulgarity for Charity that Scathing Atheist and Cognitive Dissonance put together, or are the wounds too fresh?
So I think everybody knows I work for the Scathing Atheist GAM folks. I am officially contracted with Puzzle on a Thunderstorm LLC, which is their parent company, which I helped organize. So among the things I do is to give them advice on an ongoing basis, with respect to potentially sensitive subjects, and then
one.
apparently I have also been enlisted to do unbelievably profane sketches and insults, which Harvard Law School does not adequately prepare you for having to go on the air, be accused of having eaten Mayor McCheese, and then have to perform a sketch about having unspeakable violence being threatened against you and your family. But no, it was great, and it sort of goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is this is for better or for worse. This is who I am, and I don't I don't feel like I have to put on a persona anymore, and it's a little bit of a strange legal career, but there are others that are managing to have a legal career and also be public humorists or satirists. I think about like Ken White at Popat, and maybe it's just him, but he's got a pretty good career making dick jokes, and also being an actual law talking guy.
So did you feel like a real part of the atheist podcasting community when you got into a fight on Facebook with David Smalley?
And so a couple of things on that. I mean, the first is that, I said it at the outset, like, I do tend to hold, my opinions pretty strongly. So I was kind of surprised at the direction that it went, because I think I'm far from the only person in the skeptical community that does that, right? Like, you can look up, before we knew each other, I had an exchange with Noah on his Facebook page, like, wow, 6 or 9 months ago. He did you might remember, but he did a scathing diatribe on mythicism, and I had said,
"Oh yeah,
controversial." Yeah, and
but
I don't.
What's not?
Yeah, I mean, I align myself fairly closely with his position, right? Which is to say, I'm not an expert, and I am the first person to say, I would defer to the overwhelming consensus of experts. So I think that was a perfectly valid thing to say. And then he had a bit that I interpreted sort of on first read as saying that, you know, that mythicism was sort of equivalent to, creationism and Holocaust denial. And, and it's from there that I would depart, right? Like, so for example, you could have a non-legal opinion on something that nevertheless is an argument worth entertaining, as opposed to having a non-legal opinion like sovereign citizenship that is, the legal equivalent of creationism, right? Like, I would draw those distinctions in my mind. And you might still be wrong on that first one, but it would also be wrong to say, like, yeah, you're the equivalent of calling somebody a lizard person, right? And so I got on Noah's Facebook to kind of make that point of, hey, look, like, I think there's a distinction here between minority academic position that nevertheless we ought to engage, and creationism, Holocaust denialism, like something that it's okay to just mock and disregard. And his response to me was not like, well, I think that's a well thought. His response to me was, where did I say that mythicism is like Holocaust denialism? And it was really aggressive. And I went back and I replayed, and I was all prepared to get on and be like, at 3:48, asshole. And I went back and listened, and he didn't say that. And I had to follow up and be like, yeah, you know what? Like, that was sort of the impression I got from listening to it. But when I went back and listened to the second time, you're right and I'm wrong. Sorry about that. So I kind of view that as, right, that's how a lot of us in the skeptic community, I mean, I haven't seen you dig into too many political debates on Facebook, but that's how a lot of us, we're kind of strong in the skeptic community in terms of that's how we approach these discussions. And I was a little bit surprised by the response, and then things kind of went from there. I will say, I say this all the time, like, I bear David Smalley no ill will. I just saw a note that, he's going to have Brian Fisher on his show, and, I hope he rips that guy a new asshole. Like,
That's going to be quite an episode. Although, almost
yeah,
wonder, because Brian Fisher, I mean, without him, I feel like 40% of atheist podcasts might not exist, because it's all like quoting his stuff. But for him to to get on a show is, hey, it's get your popcorn out, basically.
Yeah, no. So I'm excited about that. I think everybody ought to listen to that episode. And I don't, I don't have anything against David. I wish him well.
Yeah, the point of bringing up that wasn't like, hey, who was right, who was wrong. It was like, we do sometimes get into these battles, and sometimes it's with religious people because people are still in an angry phase, or they just see something that they think is wrong, and then somehow we point our guns at each other, and sometimes it's a misunderstanding, and it gets taken too far, and hopefully you can appear on each other's shows, or maybe a crazy idea, people just have private conversations and probably can work it out for the most part. That's my guess, that if people can say, oh, right, you misconstrued what I said, which might have happened with you and Noah, and I think you two got along okay after that, since you got to be named the official atheist lawyer, and now you're helping out scathing atheists. So I think you shook hands, at least metaphorically.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was at the end of the last Monday's Cogdis, doing vulgarity for charity, and I think it was Cecil who said, look, leave me out on podcast Facebook drama, and I agree with that. I mean, when I saw the analog to which I would put things is the just the way that, like, everything in the aftermath of Elevator Gate sort of ripped a hole in the atheist community. And I definitely have that, like, can't we all just be friends kind of mindset. Like, that's just a personality aspect. I mean, that being said, I think it's perfectly reasonable to take ideas, right, and say, if I'm going to be aggressive in fighting against this idea, if it comes from, person A, then I'm going to be similarly aggressive in fighting against that idea from person B, even if person B is a friend of mine and is a podcast show that I've been on. And look, like, I express pretty strong opinions and pretty strong statements of fact. And if I ever screw that up, I'm sure, like, look, mistakes that no one has called me out on yet in the first 14 episodes of Atheistically Speaking. Just statistically speaking, it would be remarkable if I was totally error-free in that. I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to say something that's wrong, and I absolutely would want to be called out on that. And yeah, and I think it would be okay to call out, the way I did at the start of that interaction, to be like, Andrew Torrez, like, you say you're a Harvard-educated lawyer, but, like, at minute 9 in episode 18, you said, X, and the law is not X. And I would have to go back and be like, oh yeah, man, like, I screwed that one up. That's my bad. And, right. I mean, I think that's part of what makes us skeptics, is we're supposed to be open to self-correction. Like, that would suck to have to go on the air and say I screwed that up, but I would rather do that than, like, intimidate people into not telling me I've screwed up. So, sort of my take.
Good point. So, before we call it a night, anything that you wanted to cover about, you and your show and what's happening and what's coming forward?
No, I guess what I would say is, one of the things that I'm enjoying the most about doing the show is, we've had a lot of people that engage back with us and are active on the Facebook page and post legal questions that they want us to tackle and that sort of thing. And I would love to see more of that, right? Like, I love the fact that Cogdis can run essentially an episode a week of that's 40 minutes of answering listener emails. Like, that's a lot of fun. And so I would say, if you're not listening to the show, please listen to the show. We put in a lot of work, and I think it's a great show. If you are listening to the show, get on the Facebook page, friend me on Facebook, send us an email, question on Twitter, whatever. Like, get in touch with us, because I really enjoy hearing from the community, and that helps us figure out and sort of shape the show and see where we're going to go. And I need to know, how's that Oktoberfest, man?
It's good. I'm not a fan of the IPAs, really bitter beers, and this one has a little bit of it. But what I like about the Oktoberfest beers is they're really well balanced. They have the maltiness, They have a little bit of bitterness, so that's a good one. I bought a 12-pack, so I hope I like it. There's a lot going for it. But how can you mentioned everybody needs to reach out? Well, how does everybody find your show? How does everybody find your Facebook page, email, Twitter, however you want people to reach you? How can they do that?
Sure. So it is OpenArgs, OpenArgs.com. We are OpenArgs on Twitter. We are Open Arguments on Gmail. And then anywhere else, like our Facebook page is just the Opening Arguments podcast. If you type Opening Arguments into Facebook, you'll get there. And me, I'm Andrew Torrez, Torrez. By and large, if you're a fan of the show and you send me a friend request, I will add you and we can chat just like a lot of folks have. So, well,
excellent. And see, Thomas is a genius in the way he sets up his Patreon, because he has his patreon.com/atheist and patreon.com/law, which, by the way, is my last name. And mine's patreon.com/Zachrilege, which no one can spell. So it's ZACHRILEGE. Bobby, C, Hugh, Teody are my current supporters, and they are amazing people. So if you want to join them, feel free. You can follow me on Twitter, @Zachrilege, pretty simple. Like the Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook, where I will be telling you about podcasts like Opening Arguments. And send all hate mail to zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Thank you to Andrew once again for being on tonight. And for all the listeners, stay safe. If you need to chat, I'm available. If you're an atheist and you feel alone, you're not alone. Reach out, let's chat, and get that human connectiveness that keeps people coming back every Sunday. Stay skeptical, everybody. Good night, and I love all y'all.